Hello there, welcome to DMT Highway. Don't forget to subscribe for your daily dose. Let's trip.
Duendes, elves, gnomes or leprechauns. So here's my mom's story and my uncle's story. So my first one, I'll start with my mother since my uncle's story is far more interesting. When my mom was around 2, her parents would leave her in a crib in the room near the kitchen. So to give you all a visualization, my grandparents' kitchen in Mexico has 2 doors, one that leads to the yard that was not fenced, and they had a few acres with a river going through it and lots of mango trees. And the other door leads to their living room where my mother's baby crib was. That living room also leads to another part of their yard. So regardless, when you leave home, you are either going into a forest or going into more forest at that time. Now, of course, most of that forest is torn down since my grandparents sold most of their land. So my mom told me that her mother had set her down in the crib and left her alone just for a few minutes and went to the kitchen to go do something, and when she came back to get my mother was gone. There were dirt and little handprints in the crib. My grandmother and the rest of the family, mind you, this is Mexico, very common for multiple family members to live in the same house, especially this one, since my grandma and grandpa built this house themselves, and they have 8 children with my mom being the 3rd youngest. So a search party ensures and they can't find my mom. They're searching for hours and they finally decide to return home. My grandma's in tears, and upon returning to the house with everyone, there's my mom crying in her crib covered in dirt and more little handprints around the crib and on her clothes. So, of course, this could be anything, maybe kids of another family, and there is no proof that she was taken by Duendes and then brought back. But who of kids decided to sneak into my grandmother's house? There was so much land back then, and these handprints were little. My grandmother has described them as belonging to a toddler. So how could a toddler pull a 2-year-old out of the crib? But multiple Duendes could. They were notoriously known for mischief, and in Mexico, there were tales of Duendes kidnapping children. So my grandma still to this day thinks that it was them who took my mom, maybe to go play or something, and then brought her back unharmed, but covered in dirt. Writing my uncle's story on here as well. So my uncle has always been very calm and collected and just peaceful. I don't know, it's weird like to describe his reaction to when I asked about his experience, and his kind of snapping at me, it was just bizarre. So when I was 13, I was in Mexico visiting the fam, and I remember hearing about these Duendes, and I was so curious and wanted to hear it from my uncle himself. I just shouldn't even have asked. It triggered him. He had fear in his eyes and just looked visibly upset, and he told me, "No, I'm not talking about this." Me being ashamed and guilty for bringing this fear on him, dropped it and walked away. Later that evening, my uncle took my aunt, my mom, and my 2 sisters and me to a restaurant in another pueblo. So we were at dinner and my uncle apologizes for reacting the way he did. Mind you, I'm the one who brought fear upon him. He then proceeds to tell me that he just didn't want to speak about them at his house. The same house my grandparents built. The same house my mother was kidnapped at when she was 2. So his story. He's at his friend's house, they're smoking a cigarette outside, enjoying the weather, and just hanging out. My uncle gets this strange feeling of being watched. Ignores the feeling. His friend goes inside to grab a drink, and my uncle is out there alone. He's looking around and sees a small man. So the way he described this to me was that this little man was about a foot or so tall, dressed as an elf leprechaun. Very fairy-tale-ish outfit. Imagine an elf's outfit or nymph, like, you know. So he's just in shock, staring. He doesn't even believe it himself and he's just staring. This little man, Duende, gives my uncle a smile, but not a friendly smile. More of a grin of, "You see me, this is true, and I'm here to enlist fear." My uncle is frozen, and out comes his friend who drops his drink. His friend screams and my uncle looks over at him, and right there they both know that they're seeing what they're both seeing. No hallucination. They turn to look at the Duende, and the Duende is calling them over with a hand gesture. My uncle looks at his friend and tells him, "Vamonos," like, "let's run." So they dart out of the patio and run to a car and drive off. They're scared shitless. My uncle drives them to his house. His friend wasn't going to stay at his house alone, so of course, he stayed the night. My uncle lives at my grandma's house, so fast forward, the rest of my family is home, and they can see that they're shaken up. They're asking what's going on, and my uncle refuses to speak because he's superstitious and believes that if you speak about them, they'll appear or hear you. Being convinced that he's safe and not in danger, he tells the family about what happened. Of course, everyone believes him because in Mexico, speaking of Duendes isn't uncommon. It's like speaking of La Llorona. So my uncle's room is on the 3rd floor of my grandma's house. From the 3rd floor, you can overlook most of the land. So he's up there smoking with his friend again, and they both just avoid talking about what happened. So they're having a smoke, and my uncle gets overwhelmed with the same feeling he had earlier. The feeling of not being alone. He tells his friend that they should just step back in. So my uncle goes inside with his friend, and my uncle tells him that he's going to go downstairs. Friend goes to sleep and my uncles go downstairs to make his way to the yard. My uncle has always been super in tune. I personally think everyone has a sixth sense, and maybe my uncle's ability to be able to see and communicate with the paranormal is his. He goes outside and looks out into the land. We all know what he's looking for. He's keeping an eye out and there it is. So what he describes this time is that the Duende is sitting on this tree. This Duende is sitting with his legs crossed and makes a hand gesture to my uncle saying, "Come here." My uncle nearly shits himself from how scared he is. He can't believe that he's seeing the same little man. He said that he yelled at it to go away and to leave him alone. The Duende jumps up and walks away. My uncle goes back inside the house and wakes his friend up and tells him about the incident. Both are scared shitless and stay up. The next day they tell my grandma, and they go to the church to get a blessing. Everything's fine for a couple of months. Until it visited again. My uncle was having dreams about this Duende coming to visit him and offer an exchange to him. Of course, dreams can be anything. They can be because our brain's thinking about something or someone constantly. So then more time passes and the Duende reappears. My uncle said that it was the same damn tree and he's standing on it, but this time he's holding a little bag. What is presumed that's in the bag is money. My uncle was telling us about the exchanges, so that was creepy. I literally got chills thinking about this. Like what the actual duck? What if this thing is trying to communicate with him through his dreams? So at this point, my uncle is scared beyond belief. I think if I remember this part correctly, he said he was crying and yelling at it, saying to leave him alone and to leave his family alone. The Duende cracks a smile again and leaves. My uncle sobs and looks up and it's actually gone. So my uncle said that was the last time it saw it for a while. I'm going to have to call my mom and ask for the rest of this story because this is all I remember. But from what I recall, I think he saw it once more and then moved out of my grandma's and went to go live with a friend in a different city.